So as I said, now that we are done with the first question as to how do we model the outbreak mathematically, let's try to incorporate the human behavioral changes or into these models and try to modify it. And I want to stress on the fact that again there are so many ways of modifying these existing epidemic models. You can include like more details to it, but here I am just going to focus on one extension or adding this one layer of complexity, which is how now human behavior is also coupled with these dynamics of the epidemic, right? Because as I said, epidemic and humans have co-evolved, right? So when we are facing an epidemic, it's going to change. When I know that there is an epidemic going on, I am going to change my behavior, and that behavior, because we are taking into consideration the diseases that spread through the direct contact, if it's changing my contact pattern, then it's going to change the course of epidemic as well. Okay. One thing I want to point out is the R naught that I mentioned. So basic reproduction number, it is valid only in the initial phase of the epidemic. It only tells you whether a disease will take off or not, or outbreak will happen or not, right? When the epidemic has already occurred, so then we talk about the effective reproduction number. Okay. So it's R naught is a constant and effective reproduction number is actually a variable of time. Okay. So basically our focus here when we are talking about the behavioral changes or is so that the behavioral changes are essentially targeted towards reducing this effective reproduction number, right? So that this disease will, go down, so the curve will flatten, etc., etc. So how do we modify these existing epidemic model? Say SIR model is what I am going to choose as my baseline model again, and I try to modify it to incorporate the behavioral changes. So there are so many ways of doing it. So first we have to understand this disease behavior dynamics, and then we have to understand that there is a feedback between the spread of an epidemic and the human behavior. So when the disease prevalence is low, we are less likely to change our behavior, right? If there are 4 or 5 cases of an epidemic, I am not going to change my travel plans for that, right? But if the behavioral changes kicks in when this is kind of ironic, because the behavioral changes kicks in when already the damage has been done, so which means that disease has already spread a lot, right? So when the disease prevalence is low, then no behavioral changes, nobody cares about like 2-3 people getting infected. But when the disease prevalence is high, then the behavioral changes kicks in, right? So for example, wearing mask, changing my travel behavior, etc., etc., taking vaccine and whatnot. So I take some protective measures, and so that leads to so behavioral changes happen, and that leads to, if I am talking about a directly transmitted disease, then social interactions goes down, right? And if I start, let's say I isolate myself, so for example, I started wearing mask and taking all the protective measures, washing my hands 3 times, like 10 times a day for 30 minutes or whatever is said. So then when I start reducing my social interactions, because the disease is spreading through these social interactions, so social interactions goes down, so which means my contact rate is going down now, right? The probability, so as I said, so this transmission rate beta was essentially this contact rate and the transmission probability, right? So if I start, so I consider initially that everyone is meeting like equal number of people. So if I change, so let's say I was in a scenario when the infection is low, I am meeting 20 people in a day, right? So then if I start taking precaution, I start meeting less people, I start going out less, then my contact rate will change. So I will start, on average a person will meet less people, and that in turn, so the transmission probability remains the same. If you happen to meet a person who is infected, then the likelihood of you or the probability of you catching infection is same, but this contact rate will get modified, and that's how the beta will also get modified, right? So that's how and then this beta gets modified, so obviously that beta is coming in the model, right? And then if it's coming in the model, then it's actually the rate at which people are getting infected, and then they get less infected if beta goes down, and that's how the epidemic also comes down. So when the behavioral changes kicks in, the social interaction go down, and then this leads to reduced transmission of the disease. So which means that effective reproduction number now is different, it goes down, right. And when the transmission reduced, then obviously the disease prevalence is low. So then we become more laxed, we stop taking all these precautions, and then again disease go up, right. And then again, so this is a loop that forms. So these two processes are very much coupled with each other. So this is called disease behavior dynamics, forms a feedback loop. So we are trying to capture this in terms of in a mathematical model, or we trying to integrate this behavioral changes or this feedback loop in our mathematical model that we constructed, the SIR model. So the earliest account of of including anything that has to do with the behavioral changes is this model by Capasso and Sirio. It was published in 1978 after like Karmack-McKendrick model. They generalized the KMK model, Karmack-McKendrick model, saying that now the beta I that I considered is, so this force of infection, okay, let's lambda, which is the force of infection. So I consider it to be a linear function of I, right. I consider this to be beta I, right, lambda in the model, right. So now I say it is not a linear function of I, right. It is some function of I, but not a linear function. It could be very well a linear function, that's a special case, but it can be in any function of I, but we have to have some condition in order to solve this dynamical system, right. So it has to be a continuous and bounded function. So it can be in any function I which is continuous and bounded, and that I serve as my force of infection. And then they consider GI to be a saturating type function. So it can be a function of this kind, where this is your GI. So right now I am considering it to be linear, right. This is a bad linear. So I am considering it to be linear, but it can very well be something like this which saturates over time. I can consider a function like this, or I can also consider that the function is actually after a time, this, if I is very very high, this GI, the interaction goes down, right. It actually does not saturate, it actually goes down. So I can consider it to be any function of this kind, and they accounted for, so they said that why it will not be linear but a saturating time or a decreasing function, initially increasing and then decreasing function, they accounted for it to be a some psychological effect. So it means that if I know that there are a lot of people infected in the population, if the infection rate is very very high, then I tend to limit my contact rate. So I am changing my contact rate, and that is how this is a psychological effect that is into play. And for a large number of infective individuals in the class, the force of infection or this GI may decrease as I increases, and as I said, it can saturate as well. So you say that it will not increase linearly. So the intuition behind this saturation is that after a point it's pretty much so yeah, initially what I am saying is that my chances of meeting an infected person increases if there are more infected individual in the population, but once you reach a high enough number, that's pretty much same. It's not, my chances of catching infection is not going to increase with the increase in number, it pretty much remains the same, right. So that's the saturating type function. And then if I consider that it actually goes down, so then if I consider it to be precisely this kind, so then I say that as the infection increases, my force of infection actually doesn't increase, but it decreases with I, right. So this decrease, they accounted or they explained it through a psychological, something called a psychological effect, that I will try to protect myself. So I will be like, oh, there are a lot of cases, maybe I should just stay at home, right. Okay, so that's one way, and that is as I said, this is the first ever case of where in epidemiology everyone ever talk about modifying this KMK model to sort of account for anything which is not biological, which is social, right. Okay, so then another way, so that's very generalization, a standard way. So another way of modifying these epidemic model or basic epidemic model is to consider the dynamic rates, right. So dynamic rates in the sense that transmission rate evolved during time, it's time varying. So instead of considering it to be a constant beta, I consider it to be beta t. So it's a function of time, right. So which means that my contact rates are changing. So it can be very well periodic if you are considering a disease which is seasonal. So let's say that I tend to go out less if I, so if there is a particular time over which a disease is bound to happen, then I tend to come in less, so go out less. Actually, this periodic beta is is more relevant for the diseases such as vector-borne diseases, where you can catch infection from mosquitoes. So then you try to wear more, like take more protective measures, as you know that this is the season where there are more mosquitoes, right? So in the rainy season you see more mosquitoes, so you tend to you know, take more measures during that period. Like I will apply odomas and wear full sleeves clothes, because I know that this is the period when there will be a lot of mosquitoes. But it can very well depend upon other factors as well. So essentially what I'm doing is that instead of periodic, I just consider beta to be some function of time, right? So so it can be, so which means that I start, a person can start wearing mask if there is a mask mandate. So you wear mask during that time and beta goes down, and then maybe there is a lockdown or travel restrictions, so that again will bring down beta. So but it's depending upon time, so it will be a short-lived time, and after that it will be same. So it's changing over the time. Now it's not constant, it's changing, right? And again, so for example, social distancing, if we know that there are more number of cases, then we tend to, you know, meet less people. So one particular, so how does this beta t actually mathematically behave? One particular form could be this, right, where beta t is beta 0. So I meet people with some, so I have some transmission rate beta 0 when there is no intervention, right? So if there is no mandate, I just go on with my life as usual. And then there is a beta 1 which is less than beta 0 if intervention is applied. So if the government is saying that, so it's a step function, right? So it's beta 1 and then beta 0. Usually it's high, beta 0. When if there is a mandate, then I wear mask, restrict my travel, socially distance, so beta comes down. So it's a dynamic in that sense. It's a step function. But again, as I said, it could be any other function, right? Beta t. It's a function of time. So it can be, if your disease is such, if it's valid for your disease, it can be very well periodic as well. Okay. Again, you can consider it to be depending upon, you can bring in game theory here and make it depending upon your payoffs, right? It can depend upon that as well. Okay, so this is a one example of from the COVID COVID modeling. So Kissler, etc., et al. They implemented these dynamic transmission rate, and they found, so there this shaded region is essentially the period of the lockdown. So they have the lockdown during this period, or the mandate is enforced, the interventions are enforced during this period, and then they looked at what is the cases where there is no intervention. There is a 20% reduction in the R naught, then there is a 40% reduction, and then there is 60% reduction. So these are the different level of you know.
Is this for COVID?
Yes. So this is so it's 2020, right? So it's a different level of lockdowns that there are, right? So there one is very strict, 20% reduction is very strict, then moderate 40%, then 60, a little bit more, right? More strict. So these are the three conditions, and then they vary the time interval as well of the lockdown. So there is a small, then they kept on increasing this up all the way to the like a complete lockdown for an infinite period. But then again, their lockdown is not strict, so beta is not going to 0. It's the reduction is 20%, 40%, and 60%, right? So here, as you can see that, so we have here, they have essentially how are you going to modify R naught is by modifying beta, because that's the only thing which is social in the expression of beta, because average infectious period you cannot change, right? That's the property of the pathogen.
So again, what does the red, blue, green graph mean?
It's 20% reduction, 40% reduction, and 60% reduction in the beta. So as I said, we are doing this, right?
Yeah.
Here. So this beta 1 is 20% less than the beta 0, and then 40%, and then 60%.
20% reduction in R naught. Okay.
R naught, it will be like, how will you change R naught is to beta, right?
Yeah, so is it like you lift the lockdown once it's 20% less?
No. During lockdown, during that period, the contact rate is 20% less than what it used to be without lockdown. So it's not strict lockdown. but it's a relaxed one. But how relaxed it is? So it's 20% reduction means very relaxed, right? And if it's 60% reduction, it's like kind of strict. You are reducing beta, na? So 60% reduction means it's very less than the original beta. That means a stricter lockdown, right? Okay, and then we are varying the duration as well. Okay, so again, a very important thing. So as you can see here, where this reduction is 60%, then so ultimately there is obviously some reduction in the case, but very important. You can see that here during this time, it's like this is the case where there is no intervention at all, the black curve, and then the red one is when there is 20% reduction. The blue one is when there is a 40% reduction, and green one is when there is 60% reduction. So you can see actually the epidemic going down. But what happens is once you lift the lockdown, then again the number shot up, right? That's what happening here. Because now beta has gone to the previous value, right? Beta is now whatever beta was before. Just during this time they are reducing the beta. And then they are varying this time interval as well for which they are reducing it. Is it clear? So there are two elements to it. How much you are reducing beta and for how long you are reducing it. Okay? So anyway, so the conclusion was unless you are imposing it infinitely, which is obviously not possible, the disease is anyway going to shorten, right? And a very important thing here is that if you look at this 60% reduction case, the disease actually the peak reached a very higher value than what it was for 40% and 20%. And why this happened is because there was a very strict lockdown during this time, so people couldn't actually gain immunity, right? So there was because people are recovering by catching infection as well, right? So this again, we are not considering vaccination or anything here. NPIs or non-pharmaceutical interventions are the only thing we have here at this point.
So even people are not going into the R category,
yes, So they stayed in S because it was very strict, right? So it was not a very relaxed one. So it means that a relaxed one actually turned out to be a better, like a very strict lockdown actually means that it eventually is going to backfire, right? That's what they are saying. Yeah.
The reason why you need lockdown for infinite time is also because of the way the modeling is done. It's a differential equation and not a stochastic. So,
but you would have that for stochastic as well, because here there is no intervention, additional intervention, right?
No, making stochastic is truly go to zero. If you talk about numbers, actual numbers.
But I consider the population is large enough, so it cannot happen that it will die out on its own, right?
So,
and again, a very important thing here is I'm not making beta zero. I'm making it and reducing it. And so there is still some infection, some chain of infection going on. So pathogen always have some susceptible available to it. It's not zero. So beta is not zero. It's reduced by 60%.
But not infinite case. If you look at the case about that, then for the red and blue person, it's much lower because of relative, basically almost kills
True. So it's like people were able to gain immunity, right? It was going with a slower rate. So we were basically flattening the curve, right? So people got sick and then they recovered. So then there are less. So it's going, but it's going slow. But here you have chopped down it totally, right? So it's not able to grow at all, but it's not strict enough to cut it at all, like from the root, right? So it's still persisting in the population somehow, and as soon as the lockdown is lifted, it like shot up. Yes.
So it's almost like these models, irrespective of the window of the lockdown, you have to have some amount of recovered agents for the pandemic to die out.
Yeah, so there's the only way it can die out is when individuals are immune, right? Because as I said, there's no vaccination at that point. So as long as there are susceptible people, infection will spread. So if the only way to curb the epidemic is to immunize people, right? That's why we have vaccination. And if there is no vaccine available, then the only way of gaining immunity is through catching infection, right? And if if very less people are getting infected during this lockdown, that means again very less people are also getting immunity, right? So you are basically so what is happening in the green case is that very less people get immunity, and that's why there is larger number of population available for pathogen to attack as soon as the lockdown is lifted. Okay. So one is I think it's pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic cases.
In the graph D, when when the lockdown is removed, why is the peak for 60% higher as compared to the other, like in 40% in that one?
Because as I said, most of the people, so here some people still got infected, right?
Yeah.
So then it was going but slowly. So R0, effective R0 was low. In this case now the beta has gone to the original case, right? So that's why it's very high, right? So beta here is actually higher than what beta was here for red one.
So from this kind of a situation, what kind of inference are we supposed to draw that during the lockdown, what kind of imposition should be done of the level of...
Actually this is the one that they said that is very interesting, that you actually here the lockdown is actually going to backfire, right?
Yeah.
Because you get more infection because of the lockdown. So the basic conclusion of this paper was that you have to augment behavioral changes with something else, like you have to have vaccine or some other intervention. So NPIs are not enough, right? Also, if you are going to focus on lockdown, it's better to have leaky lockdowns rather than a strict lockdown and then have no lockdown at all. So you relax it, right?
Lockdown, can you really control how much you can control? As in, you can just impose the lockdown, then you hope people follow, people follow.
That's why it's 60%, 40%, 20%, right? It can never be 100%.
Yeah, but how is 20%, 40%, 60%? How can you as a policymaker then?
It depends upon how many restrictions you are posing, right? So we had like different degree of lockdown. So we had first lockdown for in India was very strict as compared to the second one. Like you had more restrictions in the first lockdown. You were not able to travel across the states, right? Whereas it was available, it was done in the second one, right? Sometimes you have schools. First one had like no job, like no, everything was closed. Second, in subsequent lockdown, they started opening things a little bit. Although it was for economic reasons, because you cannot have a infinite lockdown. But still, that also the study shows that it helps, unless you have vaccine, obviously, right? In absence of any medical intervention. So so the conclusion is that one-time social distancing measure reduce the pandemic size, but infection research when these measures were lifted, right? So the conclusion you can take away from this is that strict interventions or strict lockdowns are not always the best choice.
Also, how important is the lockdown to cover the peak time?
That is not up to you, right, to cover it or not. It's the property of so you reduce it, and then it's the property of the epidemic, how it's growing. You don't know where the peak is going to happen.
Can we say an efficient lockdown means if we are able to contain the peak, so then it's not going to come up again?
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened here. But as I said, it's a simulation, right? When you're dealing with a real life situation, you don't know whether this is the peak or this is the local maximum, right? Right? It can very well reassert again. So there can be, for example, okay, it didn't happen here, but it can very well happen that the green one reached the peak and then it increased again, right? Any other question? Okay. Okay, so as I said, this is one way where you make your beta dynamic. How much time I have, Shakti? Till 5? Okay, I think I got this. So then the second way one way, as I said, you modify beta, and you can assume any other form of beta as well according to what your particular situation is. Then the other way is to introduce some kind of heterogeneity in the population behavior. So what we say is like, so we have some compartment pertaining to the biological aspect of the disease, right? The epidemiology of the disease. So we compartmentalize population as susceptible, infected, recovered. So similarly, we have some compartment for people showing different kind of behavior as well. So I'm still trying to keep it mean field. I can always have heterogeneous behavior, but I'm still trying to keep it mean field, and I'm saying that okay, there are two kind of people talking about the behavioral responses. One which follow the mandate and the other which doesn't follow the mandate. Okay. So one which protect themselves, and those who are protecting, again I'm making an assumption here that those who protect, they protect themselves 100%. Okay. So I'm saying that there are just two kind of people. One that doesn't care about epidemic, I'm not going to change my behavior whatsoever, and second is like me, who are extra careful and they're like, okay, I'm just going to sit at my home, I'm not going to do anything. Okay. So then we introduce another compartment, right, in the population. So I'm again going to simplify my previous epidemic model now. As I said, I don't recovered people. You can always capture, if the population is constant, you can always calculate that, figure out the recovered individual from the model. And for the simplification, I am considering the model to be SIS right now. And then, so my population has three compartments. So there are people who are healthy, there are people who are sick, right? And then there are people who are aware. And hence they are, so I am assuming again here that these people are aware and they are willing to do whatever it takes to keep themselves susceptible. So these are susceptible individuals. They are susceptible, so it's actually susceptible. So, but then they are not coming in contact with anyone. So again, this is a very strict condition that I'm taking here, that they are totally, their beta is 0. Right. So there are three kind of people now. First is susceptible, second is infectious, and third is aware individuals. And then we have, so in this model, what we are trying to do is this, so you can very well just consider it to be this much, so just three compartments, and look at the dynamics. So I'm going to go one step ahead and consider that these individuals who are becoming aware, there is some source of information. So they are getting information from somewhere, and that's how they are moving to this aware class. Okay. So there is some source of information and they come in contact with that information, that's how they become aware. So because suddenly they cannot become aware, right? So, and that information itself I'm considering to be a dynamic variable. So I'm considering that this source of information is the, let's say, media campaigns or media programs, a number of news, etc., that we get on the television. And that itself is evolving, right, with respect to time, because if there are, so it's changing with respect to time according to the number of cases, because more media campaigns or more advertisement, more mass media will focus on a particular disease if there are more cases, right, and if it's not, then the media campaign also goes down. So the source of information now also I'm considering to be dynamic, and then that leads to a separation or a creation of a separate class in the population, which are people are aware. And I am going ahead and making this assumption, just for the simplification, that these people are not coming at all in contact with anyone, right? So they are just, their beta is 0. You can relax this condition. Okay, so what happens is, so again in this model I'm considering birth and death as well, and I'm considering variable population. Okay, so birth is not balanced out by death. So birth is happening at a different rate, death is happening at a different rate. Okay, so that dn by dt is not 0 anymore. Okay, so we have immigration, so people come in the population, then the incidents happen, then Y, everything, and then they recover, go back to S, and then, so behavioral changes happen when the individual come in contact with the media campaigns, and then they become aware, and then obviously there is a compliance fatigue. So after some time they'll get bored of sitting at home, they're like, what the heck, I'll just go out and party. So they go out, and then they become susceptible again. Okay.
Recovered people can get infected.
Yes. So there is no recovered class per se. As soon as you recover, you can get infected again. But again, you can, that's like, you can extend it easily to that. Here my focus is more on creating this new class and see how this affects the dynamics, when the rate of this happening is also dynamic, because the information is dynamic. So these are my model equations. Actually, this is my PhD work. It's published in this Mathematical Computation and Modeling journal in 2011. So as I said, this is a variable population. So your A, you have some inflow with the rate A, and this is the death in each compartment, DM. And then I have, as I mentioned, there is an increased death in the infected class, there is a disease induced mortality as well, then there is this recovery, and then people recover and go back to the susceptible class. But here from a SIS model, so these are the two new state variables that I am introducing. So one is the aware class, the people who do not come in contact with everyone, and how do they become aware is by when they come in contact, or they get some information about an epidemic, right? And that information, as I said, is also a dynamic variable, it's also changing with time. So this is depending upon, so this, let's focus on the DM by DT first. So this is the media campaigns, number of media campaigns, and they are changing with respect to according to how many infected individuals are there, and obviously over the time some of them will fade out. So then otherwise it will grow exponentially. So I have to have some parameter to restrict the growth. So then this it tells say how over the time they fade out, and this is takes care of that. Now there is this interaction term. So I say that when susceptible individual come in contact with the media campaign, so there's some information, there's a behavioral change that happens, and they move to this class which is aware class, which as you can see is not interacting at all with the infected individuals. Obviously there will be a death in this natural death in this population, and then as I said, over the time the compliance fatigue will kick in and they will move back to the same behavior, which is the susceptible class. Okay. So then with these initial, so this is essentially a dynamical system, you can study it as a dynamical system with these initial conditions, and you will get that there are two equilibrium points. One is the disease free equilibrium point and the other is the endemic equilibrium point. So you here you have 0 means no infectious individual, no aware individual as well, because there is no disease, no media campaigns, no aware individuals. Whole population, A by D is the whole population when there is no disease, like that you can get from the dN by dt equation. This is the maximum that n can reach, and then obviously there is no media campaign. So this is a disease free equilibrium, and then in addition to that we have another endemic equilibrium. So this is where there is a disease is present, there are aware people, there are population at some point, because you know that population is also changing, and then there is media campaigns, right? So then again this equilibrium exists, this endemic equilibrium exists when this, so this is the R naught for my model, and when R naught is greater than 1, then you get that the endemic equilibrium exists. So one important thing here you can note is that R naught has no element of media campaigns or anything related to that, like no new parameters, right? All the things are epidemiological, nothing behavioral over here. Yeah.
Can you go back to the equation? What is the mu naught?
Mu naught is the rate at which they are fading media campaigns.
And mu is the
rate at which they are implemented, and it changes with, so increasing at a rate proportional to the infected individuals.
okay. So could you explain the third equation?
Third equation. So it says that, so there is this media campaigns, right? So when susceptible individual come in contact with the media campaigns, they get the information, they move to they form a different class which is aware class, and then this aware class will have some natural death, right? Because we are considering a disease which is going on, I mean all compartment will have some natural death, right? Because we are considering natural death and birth, you can escape that totally. Okay. And then this is the rate at which they move out of this class. So then after a time, it's a known phenomena, after a time the protective fatigue will kick in or compliance fatigue will kick in, and then you will go back to your normal behavior. So they leave this aware class and go back to the susceptible over here. Okay, and as you can see, the R naught doesn't have anything to do with the media campaigns or the protective behavior, because of the fact that we run the media campaign only if there is an epidemic, right? So the damage has again already been done here. So it again the early detection and responsiveness comes into picture here, because it's very crucial for control. So then we again, as I said, it's a dynamic system, so we study the stability and the existence, all those behaviors of the model system. I'm going to skip that. So more from the public health point of view, a very important result was that we got these like oscillations in the in IT and MT. So what it means is that, so it's M is the curve which is media campaigns, and YT is normalized to for better represent visualization. So you can see that the infected cases goes up, and after a time the media campaigns also go up, right? And as it reaches the peak, they also, so it already has started declining. They reach a peak because now the cases are declining. The media campaigns also stop focusing on too much on it. So number of media campaigns also go down, and then again obviously cases. So this is the same feedback loop that I mentioned, like initially when I started talking about the behavioral changes, is that it never dies out, it just rebound all the time. So it will keep on fluctuating. Obviously you can see here that if I run more, and so if the number of cases are high when there are no media campaigns, which means mu is 0, as compared to when there are some cases, but you will never, again, NPIs will never eradicate the disease because of this feedback loop that we have. So the prevalence elastic behavior, behavioral changes cannot eradicate the disease. That's the main result or takeaway from this study, is that even if you consider, so our thought was that if you consider the a separate dynamic source of information, that maybe that can lead to some eradication of the disease, but no, because the behavior is prevalence elastic. Okay. So similar thing have been also, so as I said, these oscillations, so the behavioral changes and this prevalence elastic behavior leads to the oscillation of the disease. Obviously as I said, the magnitude of the disease will be less as compared to when there is no media campaign. So it can flatten the curve, but it cannot eradicate the disease.
Like keep the media campaigns at a constant level. Then
yeah, so then the equation will be different, na? So that is something which I am not talking about here, but that's what I did in my thesis, that I considered that, so when I considered here that mu 0 m, right? So I considered this mu 0 times m minus m0. So what I say is that some baseline line number of media campaigns will always be there focusing on it. So then when you have that, when you have a baseline number of some constant, and then you keep this constant, and then there is an increase and decrease, then you actually see the reduction in the R naught. Okay, so similar patterns have been observed during COVID as well for NPI. So as you can see there, here is, so it is a number of ICU beds required, and as you can see, then when there is no lockdown, then the number actually shot up, whereas when there is a lockdown, although there is this oscillation going on, but then its way you can contain the wave or the number much below the public health limit, right, on below which you can maintain it, you can deal with it or manage it better way. Okay, so another way of, so that is one way. Again, as I said, you can, here I just made one compartment, but then you can make multiple compartments like that. So I can say that there is a SIR of individual who are aware, right, and then there is a SIR of individual who are unaware, right. So I can pretty much now consider this contagion, which is this, or I can consider this awareness also as a contagion, right. So I say that
someone who is infected would be aware.
they are, I mean, they are aware in the sense that they are not responsive to it, right. I mean, they are not taking the mandate.
Like if they got infected, then they know, okay.
No, they are not acting, they are aware. Aware means, here aware means you have the information and you are willing to act on it as well. So during COVID, you have seen so many people not wearing masks, right, even though they were infected. So it's a one thing, being aware, having the knowledge is a one thing, and then acting on it is a different thing. So you can call them responsive and non-responsive. Here we consider whoever is aware is responsive, and whoever non-aware are not responsive. Okay, so then we consider that here two things are spreading. One is information. So this class doesn't have the information, and this class has, oh sorry, I think it's opposite. So this class has the information, and then this class doesn't have the information. I did consider that the individual, so and then they can go back and forth between those two states, right. Does it make sense? So we have a SIR dynamics going on. That's one contagion, right, SIR, epidemic, and then there is the information as well, right. Right, and then I assume that if you have information, you are going to act on it, then only you are considered aware, or otherwise not. And then you can lose the information as well. So you can lose information in the sense that you will stop being responsive to the information. Okay. So then this is the rate at which you gain the information, this is the rate at which you lose information. Okay, it's opposite. So this is the aware individual, they get information, unaware get information, they become aware, and then they lose, which means they stop acting on it and act like unaware again. And then I did consider that if you are infected, I mean I didn't consider it, it is the paper published in JTB in 2010. What they did is, so they considered that if you are infected, then there is a high chance that you will start acting on it, but still there are people who are infected and still not acting on it. So there is a higher rate. Okay, so there now understand that there are two processes or two contagion spreading. Yes.
So how actually you are deciding the values of alpha and like this thing? I mean, so for example, when you are saying I'm choosing gamma, you have the length of this incidence.
Right.
But in case of alpha or lambda, so what is the source of this?
So it's actually theoretical, and then for behavioral changes I'll discuss towards the end. That's the basic challenge. The biggest challenge is to getting data to actually validate all these theories, right? So, but here you can, so what we are interested in seeing is how two contagion are spreading. One is epidemic and other is information, and how that will affect, because again there is an interplay between both. So how can that pan out? Okay. Yes. What is omega is the, so see, this is a standard rate at which people are becoming aware and losing awareness, alpha and lambda, right? And then omega, I am saying that if a person become infected, there is this additional rate at which they will become aware. What is it? I think these labels are wrong actually, because this is S minus is supposed to be, I think it's wrong. So it's because the assumption is that if you are infected, then there's an additional chance of you becoming aware. That's the main assumption. So as I said, there are two contagion spreading. Okay, so here we are considering the spread of information to be a word of mouth, so local information. When I consider media campaign, that's a global information. Again, what kind of source of information you are considering is also going to affect your modeling process. Here people come in contact with aware individual, and then that's how they become aware, not through coming in contact with the media campaign. I'm not showing the equation because there are so many for this model. So essentially the thing that I want to focus on is that there are two contagion spreading. So you have R0 for epidemic as well as R0 for, so this is the R0 for disease, so at which rate disease is spreading and at which rate the awareness is spreading. Then accordingly you have different, okay, these two almost look same now, but this is supposed to be orange. So there is some, so because depending upon what is the value of your individual R0, you will see that if only disease is spreading, all the awareness is spreading, and both are spreading simultaneously, or nothing is spreading. Okay. Again, this is a published work in 2010, so you can refer to this paper if you want to look at the equations. Okay, so one thing that I want to quickly mention is that, as I said, this COVID is the first pandemic that we saw during during the social media. So then there was something called infodemic. So it actually, I'm trying to connect it to the awareness. So we assume that the awareness is spreading, but then there could be misinformation also spreading. And then WHO actually coined this term called infodemic, which is too much information, including false and misleading information in the digital and physical environment during a disease outbreak, right? So why does it matter? Because this infodemic, why do we even care about this negative information? Because it can lead to, it can undermine the public health measure. For example, people may become anti-vax, they will, and then there are so many myths, right? Sometimes, so I read a newspaper where it said that drinking bleach will lead to, you will not get COVID, right? So people start doing that, and that actually, when we are already overburdened with the drinking people with the, treating people with the COVID, then these additional things actually pile up. So this infodemics is really as bad as the epidemic. Then obviously it amplifies the fear and panic, right? And influencing the individual individual behavior, hence the collective behavior, because we are nothing but the like sum of our parts, right? So the individual decision actually lead to a combined outcome, that which if I get time I will talk about in my next talk, which is essentially looking at how individual behavior actually affect the population level outcomes. And then obviously it slows the epidemic control, because some people will be like, oh, I don't want to even don't want to even be treated, right? So the key takeaway from this talk is incorporating behavioral changes is into epidemic model is just isn't just a mathematical exercise. It is crucial for epidemic control as well. By incorporating behavioral changes into epidemic model, we can improve the predictive accuracy of the model, right? And behavioral changes significantly reduce the transmission but are prone to rebound, right? So behavioral fatigue, as I said, like it will not eradicate the disease. You have to augment it with something else like a vaccine or something. Behavior shift dramatically with perceived risks, and precaution increase during surge and lax as the cases decline and increase. Long-term outcome depend upon immunity, not behavior. So behavioral change is a short-term, like flatten the epidemic, but it cannot be a end game. Challenges, as I mentioned, data availability, because and also the privacy concern. People are not willing to share data, their opinions in behavioral. So it's very hard to actually construct these, actually test these models. And obviously here the model that I talk about are all mean field models, so there is huge heterogeneity in terms of the models, right? Behavior. So these behaviors, so what will happen if individuals start acting with a different heterogeneous behavior, because here I consider once you are aware, you are all have same level of awareness, you are all responsive, etc., etc. So this including this heterogeneity of behavior, which is very, very important, right? My risk perception might be totally different from, let's say, Shakti's risk perception, and then we'll act according to a belief system. So incorporating that is also very, very challenging in models. Okay, with that I think it's the end of my first talk. I think I'll just end here. I don't think I can finish in 10 minutes the other talk.
Yeah, so I think maybe we can just open it up for
Yeah.
questions, and feel free to ask. We have about 10 minutes.
In the last slide, in the challenges section, you mentioned the concern about data availability. What kind of data specifically you are talking about?
So how do people actually act during an epidemic, right? So how do I capture this behavioral changes? So for example, it's actually hard to quantify as well, right? So and then there is this disparity as to if I have information, but then am I willing to act on it, right? And again, even the modeling that I discussed here of the behavioral changes, the contagion, that information that I consider as a contagion, it's not as simple as that. Ideally, it should be a complex contagion. It's not necessarily that I come in contact, I read a newspaper and I start following it. It's a complex contagion, right? I need like constant bombarding with the information. So if I get, so for example, if one person, so it's not as straightforward as infection. So infection is straightforward. I say that I come in contact with the infected individual, there is this probability that I'll catch infection. That's it. But when I talk about behavioral changes, then it's much more complex. So if I get information from one source versus if I get information from 10 people in my friend circle, so I'm more, it's been shown that I'm more willing to act on information or act on it if I get information from 10 people, right? So it's not a simple contagion that one interaction will like take off, right? So it's much more complex than that. So that's how it's become very, very difficult to actually even model these behavioral changes. Any other question? Yeah.
So actually like the north, and so I wanted to ask you, after if you want to make it more realistic, you show maybe I thought of two factors which you needed. One is vaccine and the other is the contagion evolved.
Yes. Also heterogeneity, right? So again, I am considering here to be mean field. So that was actually my second talk. So this again, here we are considering it to be heterogeneous and mixed. But in principle, we should have a context structure. right?
Where is the heterogeneity like when it's you?
So heterogeneity comes into picture in terms of contact. Right? So I will, instead of having homogeneously mixed population, I will have a population on a network. So I'll just quickly show you the. So see, so this is a contact network. So this is how you consider that. This is a, let's say, consider a small room population, right? So here, how do we? I form a corresponding contact network, right? So I consider each individual to be a node, and then each connection between two nodes to be a contact. So then I have individual as a node and contact is a edge. Now I study my epidemic on this network, not in a homogeneously mixed population. So let's say if this person get infected, there is a high chance that this will catch infection, this node, but not this one, right? Because it's not even infected until this node gets infected. So my chances of catching infection are not beta times I by n. It depends upon how many individuals in my immediate networks are actually infected. Okay, so that's how you modify the model. And then again, each of these nodes can have different opinions about and different behavior. Now how that individual, and they will act on it, right? So for example, for vaccine, so this might decide I want to get vaccinated, but let's say this decided I don't want to get vaccinated. How will they decide? So that's heterogeneity in terms of how I make decision is also depends upon my cost and benefit, right? So then that's when the game theory comes into picture, because now I am taking a strategic decision as to whether I'm doing a simple cost benefit analysis, whether my utility of getting vaccinated is more than the utility of catching infection, right? So what are my chances of catching infection, and what is the risk of catching infection, what is the cost of getting vaccinated, and that decides my utility. So you can actually do we have time to really quickly go through it?
We could, but I mean, another possibility is that we could sort of have it to, like tomorrow from 5 to 6. I'll have to discuss this with you, but there's another possibility. We could have a second talk maybe tomorrow. But it depends. I mean, if you like to.
You can actually. I'll just quickly I'll just show them. Like you can refer to this paper if you are interested, and you can always email me because I don't think I'll be here till tomorrow evening.
Okay.
So this is a paper where we are talking about how on a heterogeneous landscape, how people make decision, a heterogeneous decision depending upon their cost and benefit analysis using game theory, and then how do we actually, so this is a network at some time, and this is a network at the other time. So this is how the network states in the network are evolving, and then people are actually, how this epidemic is coupled with this behavioral model which actually incorporates game theory in it. So this work is done with Shakti and Shashi and Sitabra, and published in PLOS Combio.
So I just ask one question. So in this, what is the cost of getting? Is it of getting vaccinated? Is it just
No. So the cost of so how do I weigh the cost of getting vaccinated? So think of it. So if I am on a network, in everyone around, so then comes the concept of herd immunity, right? So if everyone around me, so if I have 10 contacts and 10 of them are vaccinated, I always meet vaccinated people. So there is no chance I am going to get infected, right? So then why would I get vaccinated? It seems less likely. It's like my probability of catching infection is very less if all my contacts are already vaccinated.
I mean, because
and that probability also changes. So we consider it to be dynamic. So then it's also evolving with epidemic, right?
No, but like, I mean, in reality, it doesn't harm you to get a vaccine, right?
It doesn't, but then we are rational agent, na, in game theory. So I always weigh, like there is a cost of vaccination, right? You might get some monetary cost is always there, but then you might get some side effect as well. For example, we all got vaccinated during COVID. Now we came to know that COVID shield is causing all these things, right? There was some cost associated with it. We were okay with it because that time the prevalence was so high. If somebody tells me that I have to get vaccinated and the prevalence is very low, I probably won't get vaccinated because the prevalence, the risk perception has changed. So the risk perception is also what we consider to be dynamic, and then according to my risk perception, which is calculated by, or which depends upon what is the prevalence as well as how many individuals in my immediate contact are vaccinated, I take a call. Okay. Any other question?
So, if we have any virus or something which is like exponentially growing, like a lot of infections there. So, but it is not that much lethal or something. So, like, is there any? So people might think based on the model, they might think so before it reaches the public health capacity, they should get infected themselves and get treated or something like that.
So if it's not lethal.
Yeah, it's not that much lethal.
Okay, so if it's not lethal, then people might think that it's better to get infected.
Yeah.
It again, that's a risk perception, right? Because that's how much risk are you willing to take? Is it so? That's why I said it's a cost benefit analysis. So if my risk perception is very high, I think that oh, I don't want to get infected at any cost. So then my risk perception is very high. That's why I'm calling it risk perception. Right? It's my perception and it's individual's perception. I might think that okay, it's bet I'm okay with falling sick for 20 days. Might or maybe there is another version of me who thinks no, I cannot afford to be sick for 2 days, so I might just get vaccine. So there is a risk perception also associated with it.